Hello and welcome to Deeper, a podcast where we have honest conversations with fascinating people who have lived unique lives and the companion piece to our YouTube series Deep. We want to give you a deeper window into the experiences and worlds of our amazing guests. So if you enjoyed today's interview, please consider subscribing. There will be a new video every week. My name is Mariana and today I'm joined by Ariel. Ariel, hi.
Hello.
It's really nice to have you here.
Thank you for having me.
Can we start by you telling us who you are, what you do, why you're here?
Sure. I'm Ariel Anderssen. I'm a submissive BDSM performer. So I model BDSM genre films and stills. I have worked in the BDSM arena for 20 years and I've written a book about it as well. So BDSM is very much my career.
Can you tell us a little bit about your upbringing? What was childhood like?
I grew up in a religious cult. My parents were Jehovah's Witnesses. So I know people don't tend to think of the Jehovah's Witnesses as a particularly bad cult, because there are certainly some that are more extreme and are worse. But the thing that I remember most that had the greatest effect on me about growing up as a Jehovah's Witness is we believed the world was about to end. So I grew up believing that I was never going to reach adulthood in the normal world. So I didn't think I was ever going to need a job. I didn't think I was probably ever going to be old enough to get married, have children of my own. And I didn't think I was going to have any choices over what happened in my life because I'd been told Armageddon was going to come while I was still a child. God was going to just save the Jehovah's Witnesses and we were going to live in paradise on earth, building log cabins and making friends with wild animals. And that was going to be our life. And honestly, I found that idea terrifying because the idea of living forever and not having a purpose always seemed frightening to me. So honestly, I grew up pretty scared.
How long did you kind of stay in the Jehovah's Witness, and when did they leave, and how did that transition happen? Because I can imagine the transition to the life outside of that can be quite challenging.
Yeah. So I was born into the Jehovah's Witnesses and we stayed in that religion until I was 13. I've got an older sister who's 4 years older than me. And so by the time she was 16, she had a secret Jehovah's Witness boyfriend. And when the elders of the congregation of Jehovah's Witnesses found out that she was dating a Jehovah's Witness boy, they ordered the boy to break up with my sister because you weren't allowed relationships before you were 18 in the Jehovah's Witnesses. And we were being told that because Armageddon was about to come, we shouldn't be entering into romantic relationships because the world was just about to end. So he broke up with my sister really brutally and suddenly. And she was absolutely devastated. And I think it gave my parents an opportunity to realize that allowing the elders of this religion to have so much power over people in the family, including the children, was maybe not the healthiest thing. And I think it gave them enough distance just to consider whether we really should be in this religion at all. So they decided to leave. And so aged 13, I was suddenly not a Jehovah's Witness anymore. And it was fantastic, but it was also terrifying because I was 13 and I suddenly realized I am going to grow up. I am going to need a job. I'd not bothered to do any schoolwork because I didn't think I was ever going to need any qualifications. And I had to get used to the idea that I was going to die one day, which I'd been told I would never have to face. So it was quite an adjustment to make. And we lost all of our friends as well, because if you leave the Jehovah's Witnesses, no Jehovah's Witnesses are allowed to speak to you anymore. So it's quite an isolating thing to leave the religion because it's like you have to start your life again from a social point of view.
God, this sounds harsh.
Yeah.
When you mentioned your sister and the fact that, so you said she was older, so she was like 16, 17, and they were like not allowing her to even date someone. I'm imagining, and correct me if I'm wrong, that the kind of, the whole conversation about sex and all of that in Jehovah's Witness is quite limited. How is all of that viewed in Jehovah's Witness, and how do you think that influenced your kind of view of sex and sexual relationships and stuff?
In common with a lot of religions, and especially in common with a lot of religious cults, your sexual options are very limited. So Jehovah's Witnesses have to be heterosexual. Homosexuality is completely banned and frowned on. You can't be a practicing gay Jehovah's Witness. Furthermore, there were a whole load of extra rules that we were told were really important. So I remember being 9 years old and being told that masturbation was something that no one should do. And if you did that, Jehovah would very much frown upon it. Oral sex was spoken about as something you shouldn't indulge in. I don't know why. And again, I was hearing this stuff far before I was of an age where any of this stuff was of interest to me. I didn't know what oral sex was. So the first thing I found out about it was that it was wrong. Some sexual positions were discouraged as well. So again, I mean, I was far too young to be hearing discussions of this sort of thing, but Jehovah's Witnesses don't have any kind of Sunday school provision. So everyone of whatever age is in the same thrice weekly meetings. And so anything that gets discussed, the children are there for. So actually, as I look back, I think that's immensely sexually inappropriate because I was being given all this information when I was of an age where I didn't understand it. But yeah, basically, almost everything you might want to do sexually was banned, really. Only the most vanilla and typical and heteronormative type of sex was acceptable, and all of it had to be after marriage. So if you were dating someone in the Jehovah's Witnesses, you weren't meant to do anything before you got married. So people were kept very ignorant about sex.
So I'm imagining you're 13, you kind of, the family's out of Jehovah's Witness, all of that is kind of, I don't know, maybe not out of the window, but like you're now in this wide world. And how is your sexuality developing? How are you kind of finding yourself and all of that?
When we left the Jehovah's Witnesses, my parents immediately became fundamentalist Christians. So actually, from a sexual point of view, not much changed. It was still not okay to be gay. It was still not okay to have sex outside of marriage. So actually, from a sexual morality point of view, things were very similar. Now, I'd always loved the idea of being tied up. So obviously I wasn't aware this was sexual. I just remember hearing the story of Peter Pan and thinking Captain Hook was obviously the most exciting character because he was tying people to the masts of his pirate ship. And I just thought, wow, that sounds amazing. So the idea of being tied up or the idea of being spanked was really appealing. None of this stuff happened to me. I had no idea if I'd enjoy the reality. I just always liked the parts of stories where that was involved, or in films if someone got tied up or kidnapped or punished in some way. I just liked it. I had no idea this was going to actually be the basis of my sexuality until I turned 16. And of course, I was going through puberty, and I started to realize that these things I was thinking about were sexual thoughts. And it was very poor timing because there was a Conservative member of Parliament in the UK who was found dead, apparently as a result of some sort of autoerotic asphyxiation experience that had gone wrong. And the papers were full of this story, and they were calling him a sadomasochist. And there was discussion of what that meant. And I read these reports and I was horrified because I realised, okay, if he's a sadomasochist, I think that's what I am too. And the shame of that. I mean, I shouldn't have been ashamed because it's just a sexual choice. I mean, it's not even a choice, it's an identity. You can't help it. But because the articles were so cruel, he'd lost his life and people were just laughing at him like he was a joke, and that it was funny that he'd had this weird sexuality. And I thought, okay, well, I guess there were two of us. One of us is dead. I'm the other one. I'm the other freak. And I must just never tell anyone ever. This has got to be a secret I just take to my grave, because if I tell anyone, they're not going to want to date me. No one's going to want to marry me. No one's going to want to be friends with me. This is like the only thing I can compare it to, maybe, is if you discovered you were a paedophile. Like the horror of that. That's what it felt like. Just, this is something so disgusting. I must never act on these instincts. I must never tell anyone. I must shut this down. I mustn't be what I think I am. And so I had a very lonely few years of trying to do that, and not telling anyone and trying to ignore what my instincts were. And I think if I hadn't found my career, it's possible I might still be doing that, because the shame was so deep. Coming from such a strict religious background, the idea of being ashamed of what you are and trying to suppress it is very normalized. That's something that's very encouraged, that, you know, we're all basically sinful. Our instincts are kind of disgusting. And what we need to do is we need to curb those instincts and try to be better than what we are. And that's what I tried to do.
I'm really sorry.
It's fine, thank you.
It's actually incredible, the amount of shame that kind of comes with all of this things, and kind of probably the taboo of that. But also, I guess it's the timing as well. I'm hoping that now it's a little bit more kind of open, though. I don't know. I'm hoping.
I really hope that if you were 16 now, at least if you knew what to search for online, you would discover that this is a sexual identity and that there are more people who share it. I just hope that you'd find out enough to know that you weren't alone, because as a BDSM model now, basically the reason I do my job is to show people every day, people like me who are into these things, I just want them to know they're not alone. And obviously I don't want people who are under 18 to be looking at my work, but I hope they might be able to find, you know, an educational website that tells them that, this is a sexual orientation and you're going to be fine.
Yeah. So at what point did that, and how did that happen to you, that you've kind of accepted and embraced what your sexuality was?
So just as I discovered I was kinky in a very sudden way, I discovered I wasn't alone in a very sudden way. So I trained as an actor, so I was doing classical Shakespeare performances, and I'd been approached by a few photographers about modelling. So I had taken a couple of photo shoots, and it was my second ever professional photo shoot in London, in Camden. And it was only a 2-hour shoot, and I got on really well with the photographer. And after the shoot, he said he was going to an exhibition. There was an opening. And he asked if I'd like to go with him. And I thought that would be fun. I'd never been to like a gallery opening before. And I thought, wow, that sounds sophisticated. So I went with him. I had no idea what this exhibition was about. And I walked through the door of this gallery and it was a BDSM exhibition. And so on one side of that door, I'd been all alone in the world with my sexuality as far as I knew. And on the other side of that door, I saw representations of my sexual identity all over the walls. And the relief of that, of just knowing I wasn't alone, I guess it was one of the most profound moments of my life, because it just told me I wasn't by myself. And that was such a relief, because this work was beautiful. It's not like it was hardcore pornography. It wasn't particularly shocking. It was very stylish representations of BDSM. It was very entry friendly. It wasn't the sort of stuff that a beginner would be scared of. The beauty of it just told me that, one, I wasn't alone, but also this world wasn't just going to be full of awful, dangerous, depraved people. The BDSM community was full of people who were making beautiful art with some integrity. So I spent the evening walking around, meeting some of the artists. And by the end of the night, I had a lot of artists' business cards. and I'd been booked for some BDSM photo shoots. And so the first time I did BDSM, it was at a professional photo shoot. And it was everything I'd hoped that it would be.
How did that feel? How did that feel to kind of, how old were you at that point?
I was 25. And so 7 years of my adult life had gone by without having any clue that this stuff was on the internet. I could have found it with a couple of mouse clicks, and I just didn't know to go looking. So it was incredible. It was like, I guess, opening the door to a secret garden and finding all the things you'd hoped life would involve, but that you knew wouldn't be there. Suddenly finding that, I mean, your literal dreams were going to come true. And I remember I got hold of this thing called the Fetish Map of London, and it had on it all the different galleries and shops and nightclubs that were kind of kink friendly. And I was living in London, so I started going to all these places, and I started meeting the people who were going to become my community and my friends. And it was just like I was starting my adult life all over again. It was the most amazing experience. And it's one of the reasons that I feel sometimes the way people talk about pornography, it's as though it's worthless and it's just this kind of quick fix that gives you an orgasm and then it's over. For me, discovering BDSM pornography, it gave me my friendship group, it gave me my community, it gave me my career, it gave me acceptance of my sexuality. Eventually it gave me my husband. I mean, it kind of, for me, it was a very good discovery. It was and working in porn was my kind of sexual awakening, honestly.
We probably should define quickly what BDSM is for anyone who comes into this not knowing.
Sure. I always get confused with this because it means multiple things. Bondage, domination, sadism and masochism. Or bondage, dominance, submission, and masochism. People use it in different ways. It's like an umbrella term that you can use in multiple ways. But it basically means some sort of erotic power exchange, sometimes with pain involved and sometimes without.
And can you explain, again, sorry for like people who don't understand or don't know about it, can you explain your own sexual tendency and kind of what is the difference between submissive and dominant?
So I would describe myself as a submissive masochist. There are people who are just pure masochists and the kind of power dynamic doesn't necessarily mean much to them. The idea of being in control or being controlled kind of leaves them cold. What they want is sensations. On the other hand, there are people who are submissive and who don't want to be hurt. They just want someone in charge of them, you know, making the decisions in the bedroom. For me, I'm both because I like to have someone take charge and I also like to experience some sorts of pain. And then there are kind of my opposite number would be a dominant sadist. Dominant sadist, that's what I would be kind of looking for in a partner. Someone who likes being in control, likes making the decisions, and also likes inflicting some sorts of pain in some ways.
So when you say you would be looking for dominant sadist and that's kind of your, what would you like? Does that mean that if you meet someone or if you have a partner who's not that, does that mean that it's just not gonna work? It's like, or like how does that work?
I did try to date someone who was vanilla, and certainly I definitely felt the lack of that element to our sex life. So now I'm married to a dominant sadist, so that worked out well. But if I, by horrible chance, found myself single again, I would not look at dating anyone who wasn't dominant and sadistic, because I know it's a really important part of my sexuality. Just as because I'm heterosexual, I would not ever be looking to date a woman, because I know that the sort of people I'm attracted to are male and they're dominant and they're sadistic.
The community you grew up in is the community where women are submissive. And now you grew up to become a submissive BDSM model. Do you think it's somehow connected? And also, do you think like there is a link between that and kind of your desire for that?
I used to kind of torture myself with this idea because it frightened me that my sexuality was because of something that was wrong with me. So traditionally, people have often kind of blamed kink on some sort of childhood trauma. And I think broadly speaking, that's been discredited as a theory. But yeah, it did used to worry me because I thought there might be something wrong with my sexuality. I thought it might have come from something that was wrong. So what I guess I'd say is, to begin with, the kind of submission that's involved in being a woman in a religious cult is so boring. It involves not getting to talk, not getting to make decisions, not getting to take the lead on anything. It's not the kind of submission that I find exciting, for sure. And although it would be, I think, easier for me to express this if I turned out to be dominant and sadistic and what I wanted to do is beat men and tell them what to do, that would feel like a much easier journey from growing up in a religious cult. I think people would accept that quite easily, that, I want the opposite of what I grew up with. But what I actually think is I have the opposite of what I grew up with, because what I have is freedom to choose. And that's what I think emancipation is. That's what I think feminism is. I think it's being a woman, knowing what you want and having the right to go and get it. And what I want is this very specific type of submission, very specific type of masochism with a man who I've chosen. And so that doesn't feel anything like the sort of submission that I grew up with in a religious cult, which makes me very glad.
That does sound very liberating, actually.
That's what it feels like. Having had so few choices sexually, expecting that my sex life would be so dictated for me by the confines of my religion, getting to do exactly what I want with who I want under the circumstances that I choose, yeah, that feels like the absolute opposite of my expectations growing up.
Just, can you explain to us, so what does it mean to be a professional BDSM model? What does it entitle? Can you talk about it?
So until COVID, my job as a BDSM model involved traveling around the world, going and working with professional photographers and producers who were either creating bondage photographs or bondage videos. So I would obviously do my research quite carefully, because there is an inherent risk involved in doing something like this, either because you might find yourself working with someone whose intentions are not good, which is honestly very, very rare. I've had very few bad experiences with people who had bad intentions. But you also have to be careful, because someone with the best possible intentions can also do something horrifically dangerous to you just through ignorance. So I'm very careful with my research, where I look at the skill level of the people who are wanting to tie me up and spank me. So fortunately, because they're producing this stuff online, I can go and watch it online and choose to work with the people who I think are shooting the sort of stuff that I'm comfortable producing myself. Then COVID happened and I had to stop touring for a while, and I took a lot of my business in-house. So I started, instead of working for producers, I started shooting specifically for customers who would come to me directly. So they would want pictures of me wearing a ball gag or a video of me hogtied on a bed. And I started producing that myself. With my husband, who is a BDSM photographer and filmmaker. So we were very lucky that we were in isolation together during COVID. And so we shot a lot of stuff together, and I shot a lot of stuff myself. So now, these days, I split my time between touring the world, working with producers, and staying at home and producing my own work whether I'm the producer and the performer, and selling it directly to my customers.
So do I understand correctly that you don't have sex with the clients? And
no. So I don't do in-person sex work, and I don't do full service sex work personally. In fact, I don't have any kind of sex on camera, because my interests are really towards BDSM rather than acts of penetration. That's not really my scene. It's not a moral choice. It's just that what I'm really into is being tied up and spanked. So for me, those are sex acts. But of course, to people who aren't into that, that doesn't look like sex. But I think it would be really disingenuous of me to pretend it's not pornography, because for someone who is kinky, that is kind of the ultimate in pornography. So since the end use of the productions I'm in is for people to masturbate to it, just because it's not hardcore. I really don't think I should be pretending it's something somehow superior or cleaner to hardcore sex. If I was into hardcore sex, that's what I would be shooting. But what I'm into is being spanked.
But you still define this as sex work, right?
Oh, yeah. No, I would definitely call it sex work. I feel like in recent years, as an act of solidarity, a lot of people who once upon a time wouldn't have called themselves sex workers, we are coming out and admitting that, well, it's all sex work. It's, if the intention of the work is to arouse people, then it's sex work.
Again, you don't have to give me like an exact figure if you're not comfortable with, but I was wondering, with all of that, what is the kind of money you could make as a BDSM model?
So I've been in it 20 years, and to begin with, for the first 5 or 10 years, I was probably making about £50,000 or £60,000 a year. By 2017, I was making £100,000 a year, and now I'm making £250,000 a year, which feels amazing because I'm 47, which doesn't feel like the age people would expect a pornographic performer to be. So it makes me really happy that people tend to assume that a career like mine kind of peaks at 25. And I'm really happy to be able to tell people I started at 25 and I maybe am reaching my financial peak at 47. And maybe I'm not even at the peak yet. I don't know.
I can't believe you're 47. I thought you were much younger.
Thank you. I have Botox.
In terms of the videos you make based on the client requests, I wanted to ask you about what are the kind of weirdest and strange or funny or kind of requests that you can tell us about.
On one hand, I don't think any of it's weird because we're all a sexual minority of one. Like, all of our sexual tastes are idiosyncratic. So when I say that something is strange, I don't mean it in a pejorative way. But through talking directly to customers who are ordering customs, I have become aware of how wide the variety of sexual tastes can be. And that is just endlessly fascinating to me. So last week, I was dressed as an equestrian in jodhpurs and riding boots. And the video involved me getting dressed in full PPE, so a plastic suit, boot covers, plastic gloves, and a mask. And that was the porn. Like, nothing else happened. That's what the video was. For the customer, that was exactly what he wanted to see in his porn movie. Sometimes I'm just scolding the camera as though the camera was a person and as though I was a headmistress who was very disappointed with your work. Sometimes it's all about what I'm wearing. So I might be wearing a roll neck sweater and it's all about talking about the texture of the fabric, how it feels against my skin. And I think the kind of common themes that run through the work is, although I might be wearing very disparate outfits and I might be behaving in all sorts of ways, the common themes are that my customers want to see their kink represented and seen as normal. So in the videos I make them, I'm a woman who's into roll neck sweaters or plastic suits or Wellington boots, because I guess they want to see their kink reflected in someone else, which is a very human, normal instinct. And the other thing that I think is a recurrent theme is that people want to be appreciated for who they are. So often they want me to say their name as part of the video. They want to feel like they're part of the scene and that I'm interested in their sexual tastes. So whatever that is, whether it's drinking a fizzy drink out of a plastic cup or covering my face in golden syrup, the point of the video is to take part in their sexual activity and appear to enjoy it.
I guess golden syrup is not a figure of speech. That's an actual example.
Literal golden syrup, which I love. So I'm happy about that.
Who doesn't like golden syrup, to be honest? Are there, though, any video requests that you would refuse? Is there like a line?
Yes. I actually, I refuse a lot of requests, either because I find it personally distasteful or because I don't think I can do a good job. So, for example, I'm really sensitive to cold. So if people want me to get into an iced bath, for example, I would just say no, because I know I'm not the right person to do that. And it's difficult turning down custom videos because the act of saying no, I'm aware might make my customer feel really judged. But on the other hand, there are things that I don't feel would be responsible of me to shoot. So, for example, an example of this that does occasionally come up is if I was going to appear to die in the video. I just think that's too serious a subject for me to be comfortable to represent it. And maybe that's unfair because we all watch dramas all the time where people pretend to die. This is a very normal thing in drama. But I just feel like I don't know how I justify that if someone watched my video and then killed themselves, for example. So that is something I would definitely say no to. I would also say no to appearing to be threatening someone's life. So I wouldn't want to make a video where I was saying I was going to shoot someone or anything like that. Is there anything else I would say no to? Oh my gosh, yeah, this is a weird one. Because I feel a bit bad about saying no to this. But I sometimes have non-white custom customers who want me to use racial abuse towards them. And honestly, as a submissive woman, I totally understand where they're coming from because I like sexual words used against me by the right person. If I've chosen, there is some kind of misogynistic language I find kind of hot. So honestly, I can totally see why someone might enjoy having racial slurs used against them in a sexual context. That is totally their prerogative, and there's nothing wrong with that. I can't do it. I can't do it because those are not words I would ever use in my normal life, and I can't bear to say them on camera. And it makes me feel a bit bad because basically what I'm doing is I'm turning someone down who wants something completely legitimate, and I'm saying no, and I don't like it, but I can't do it.
Speaking of like that sort of requests and also aggression that you've mentioned, do you think that a submissive BDSM images of women tied up are actually contributing to depiction of violence against women?
So are you saying are you asking if the depictions of violence against women might contribute to actual?
Yeah, like do you think that this is kind of depiction of violence against women or not?
I'm really glad to say that in the years since internet pornography has become widely available, broadly speaking, statistics show that instances of actual sexual violence have gone down. I'm really glad to know that because yes, that is something that otherwise would concern me a lot. I think as someone who's putting a lot of images of female submission into the world, sexual female submission into the world, I do feel like I've got a responsibility to make sure that my customers don't think it's real. And so something I do that I feel very strongly about is my social media presence is very feminist. So I talk a lot about everyday sexism and violence against women in real life. And I feel like everyone has probably a responsibility to do that. But I think especially if you are putting work into the world that depicts a fantasy of kind of ritualized sexual violence of a sort, I think I have a particularly great responsibility to make sure no one thinks this is real. And so I try very hard to make sure that people understand the difference between my worldview and my sexual tastes.
Is there like geographically where your majority of your clients are, do you think the specific nations are more kind of kinky than the others?
So most of my clients, I guess, are a self-selecting group because they have to speak reasonable English because I can only speak English and a little tiny bit of Welsh. So I don't hear much from people who don't have some level of decent written English. So a lot of my customers are British, a lot of my customers are American, I have some Australian customers, but I also have a lot of German customers and a lot of Japanese customers. And then I have this sort of scattering of customers from everywhere else in the world as well. So I think what that tells me is that the kind of distribution of sexual diversity is pretty even. That I'm sure there are some cultural things that have some impact. For example, in the UK, caning is still incredibly popular in the spanking impact play genre, whereas there is no tradition of caning in the USA. So if I have a customer who wants to see a spanking scene and they're from the USA, they are very likely to want wooden paddles used or belts used. So you do see some variety based on where people are from. But basically, the statistics I've seen suggest that probably 10% of us are kinky in one way or another in terms of BDSM. So 10% of us are into some type of BDSM, either as a dom or a sub or both. And so, yeah, I guess 10% of us worldwide have got fantasies that are somewhat in this arena. And that makes me really happy.
And are your clients predominantly male or female?
Most of my clients are male. I do have some female clients. So sometimes I have female submissives who I think see me as, I guess, kind of like maybe an avatar who gets to go and do the things that they'd quite like to do, but they're not in a situation where they can. So they like to see me do things that they would like to experience themselves. So I do have a few female clients, including some female submissives. But yeah, mostly I guess because, again, I'm very public about liking dominant sadistic men. That's the customer base I get. I also get quite a lot of male submissives who, again, I think that because the things I do in my personal life are the things they want to do in their personal life or have done to them, they think that I'll have an understanding of it. So I might be playing a dominant in the video, but I'll be describing activities that I'm pretending I'm doing to them. And I can describe them well because I've had them done to me. So I guess there's that as well.
And what is the gender split between submissive and dominant partners in general? Do you think that there is more of one gender that is submissive generally, and then more of the other gender that is dominant?
The data I've seen varies very widely, so it seems quite difficult to get a very clear idea of this. But broadly speaking, it seems to be fairly equal. The only thing I'd say is there does seem to be a bit of an oversupply of submissive men who can't find partners. So if you're a submissive woman, you're very likely to be able to find someone to do those things with. Ditto being a dominant man. And if you are a dominant woman, you're likely to be inundated by requests from male submissives who want to serve you, which is why that is such a thriving industry, being a female professional dominatrix, because there's a whole group of submissive men who haven't managed to find real life partners. So I don't know if that's because there really is a large group of submissive men, or whether it's just that they're particularly greedy and want to go and have loads of experiences with lots of different female dominants. But other than the fact that I do feel like there's quite a lot of submissive men who don't get to find partners, other than that, it does feel fairly equal.
And what about the kind of the non-heterosexual divide in the community? Is the gay kind of LGBTQ community, is that part of the BDSM community as well?
So there seem to be lots and lots of kinky people within the LGBTQ plus community. I don't know if there's more kinky people in that community. My instinct is no. It feels like it's kind of 10% of us, whatever demographic you really look at. So yeah, I wouldn't want to say that they are more likely to be kinky, but I don't think they're likely to be any less, for sure.
So speaking of partners, you mentioned your husband quite a few times. And so how did you guys meet and find this perfect balance that you have?
We met because when I started working as a BDSM model, one of my new model friends told me about my husband's website, Restrained Elegance, and said, oh, it's a really lovely bondage site. It's really kind of gentle and glamorous. It's not too hardcore. So I went and looked at it and I thought, oh, that looks just the sort of thing I want to do. So I wrote to him and asked if he'd like to work with me. He said no. He was the first person who who'd said no to me at that point in my career. And I was really offended. So I thought, well, I'm sure he's wrong. I'm sure I would be a good model for him. So I wrote back and offered him a deal, like a reduced day rate. And he said yes to that. So I went and worked with him for a day. And then he apologized to me and said, well, I can see you are a good model for this. So I'll invite you back. And so we became friends and we worked together for many years before we got together. And then we both found ourselves single and we tried playing together, doing BDSM together as friends. And then a romance developed and we've been married 12 years.
Wow. And a photo, do you still, as you mentioned, you still do photo shoots with your husband to this day. So are photo shoots with him different from photo shoots with other photographers?
The main difference when I work with my husband is that we're very likely not to get through the whole shoot because he's very likely to say, oh, I'm so tired, let's just stop and have a cup of tea, in a way that he would never do with a model who'd just come in for the day. So it is a much more laid back experience because we're shooting from our own homes. And I think it's very difficult to remain fully professional when you're working with someone you're so intimate with. So it's lovely, but yeah, it is rather different from going somewhere specifically to do a job for someone for 8 hours.
And where do you draw the line, though, between this is work and this is us having our private time?
It is a little bit of a difficult thing to find, certainly in the early stages of our relationship. Often we would start by shooting a film or pictures and then we'd sort of stop making the film and just carry on doing the activity without filming it. But over the years, we've become better at being professional, finishing the movie.
Sticking with it.
Yeah.
And with your husband, for example, and again, you don't have to answer because it's a personal question, but would you still ever have just vanilla, regular sex, or is that completely out of the picture and it just doesn't do anything for you?
I like vanilla sex. I say vanilla sex in that I can enjoy sex where there's no bondage involved and no spanking involved. But am I ever thinking vanilla thoughts? Like, probably not. So it might look vanilla, but in my mind, I always like the idea of my partner being the one in control, the one choosing the positions we're in, telling me what to do. So it might look vanilla. I don't think it's fully vanilla, but yeah, it's not like, some people who are kinky would say that they feel quite asexual when it comes to vanilla sex acts. And that's not what I feel like. I like vanilla sex acts, but I guess my interest in BDSM probably informs how those acts are carried out.
As a kind of the opposite, maybe a little bit of that, do you think that being kinky is like a spectrum? Do you think that everyone is kinky to a certain degree, or is there like some people who definitely not at all?
Wow. There must be some people for whom BDSM has absolutely no appeal, but BDSM is only one of the kinks you could have. So, I sometimes wonder if calling some people kinky or some activities kinky and some not is a bit of a misleading thing, because how are we deciding what's a kink and what isn't? I've always thought this about kind of lads mags, that you could say that they're big boob fetish, because the models that traditionally are on lads mags covers, they always do have really big breasts. But we have sort of, as a culture, decided that that's mainstream. That's normal. It's normal for a man to like big breasts. But if she's wearing latex, that's a kink. And, why? Why? I guess it's just the number of people who like one thing as opposed to the number of people who like another. There's such a wide variety of things we might like sexually that possibly they're all kinks, or possibly none of them are. They're just this wide variety of ingredients that we can choose from. And we all have a slightly different combination of things that we find sexually appealing. So maybe in the long term, that's how we'll learn to think about different people's sexual identities. Like, maybe there will be no such thing as, having a sort of alternative kinky sexuality or a normal mainstream one.
It's going to be all more blended in.
Yeah, I like that idea. Yeah, because then there's less shame attached to it, and less feeling that you should keep these things secret. Because one thing I do hear from my customers a lot is that often they'll say they've never told anyone in their real life about what they're into. I'm a safe person to tell because I'm outside their social group. And I think, if we saw that change in the next 10 or 20 years, that would seem like a really healthy thing, because I know what it's like to live trying to keep your sexuality secret from everyone you know. And it's crushingly lonely. And I like the idea of living in a society, trying to help create a society where people don't feel like liking the look of women in swimsuits should be this terrible secret, or liking women in Wellington boots, or enjoying putting on a latex mask. I feel like if we could stop feeling like those things should be secret, it might be quite good for us.
I wanted to get back to your family and ask you, do they know what you're doing, and how do they feel about it?
My family do know what I do, because I thought how awful it would be if one day they came across it online and thought that I must have been really desperate for money and I'd just desperately done this thing I didn't want to do. So I thought, to be fair to them, I must let them all know that the things I'm doing are as a result of what I'm into, rather than just because I needed a job. So I took the decision to tell them that a long time ago. And it was quite frightening. But the thing I always want to say to people is that if you are honest, especially about something a bit embarrassing like your sexuality, if you're honest with the people you know, it makes them feel safe to tell you stuff about their sexuality. So what I have experienced as a result of telling my family a lot about myself sexually is I've made myself a safe person for them to confide in, and that has been such a good thing for our relationships. And I'm really glad that I discovered that, because I wouldn't have necessarily expected that to be the result of it. But as a result, I feel like we've had quite open, frank discussions about sexual identity, and I think that's really, really been healthy. So my sister, who's married to a Church of England vicar, she actually does my emails for me. And I always like to think of my emails to customers coming from a vicarage.
That's quite lovely.
Yeah, I really like it. So I try to employ my family whenever there is something that's kind of appropriate for them to do, because it feels like really nice turning it into a bit of a family business.
Just a family BDSM business.
Yeah.
Do you think you will be doing this for the rest of your life? Do you think there's an expiry date on this kind of work or not?
Once upon a time, I would have thought there would definitely be an expiry date on this kind of work. But then I keep getting older and I keep getting more and more booked up. So I think what's more likely to happen is the kind of roles I will be asked to play will gradually change. So I've seen that over the years, that when I started, I think I wore a lot of school uniforms or like cheerleader uniforms. And now I'd be more likely to be wearing a tweed skirt and a silk blouse and pretending to be a teacher. And maybe in 10 years' time, that will change again. So as long as I stay healthy, I would very much love to stay in this job, because it's given me such pleasure. And I know it gives pleasure to my customers and also makes them feel less alone, which is really nice. And I have lots of ideas about other things I'd like to do, but there is nothing I would like to do as much as I like doing this. So yeah, my plan is to stay with this until I retire from work altogether.
I mean, I've interviewed a 75-year-old escort, and I mean, she's been doing it. I guess as long as you're flexible in your case and physically active, then you're fine.
Yeah, it feels like there's an element of luck to staying in any kind of physical job into middle age and later life. And I know that all sorts of illnesses or injuries might really curtail the things I can do, but I'm doing my best to stay physically able to do these things, not just for my job, but for my own personal pleasure as well. So yeah, I'm going to try, because I love it.
I wanted to ask a last thing, because I just really wanted to get that in, and we've chatted with you about it. Do you think that BDSM is depicted realistically in film and TV?
In mainstream film and TV, BDSM it's often used as like a shortcut to show that there's something wrong with a character, especially if they're dominant or sadistic. So I can think of several examples in mainstream film where someone's a psychopath, and the way the filmmaker shows us that that person is a dangerous serial killer is that they have some BDSM equipment lying around. So I hope that's not very realistic. I mean, that seems like a really kind of phobic way of representing a group of people. That said, I think there are some nice depictions that I think are fairly realistic. I think that the movie Secretary, which came out, I guess, about 20 years ago, I thought that was a really decent, respectful representation of a kinky couple. And it's not like they'd figured everything out. They were a bit dysfunctional, but I think it was quite a sympathetic portrayal. And there have been some others that I thought were, reasonably realistic. The one that everyone always mentions is that scene in Pulp Fiction, which is obviously, I mean, it's rape, it's horrific, and it's got kind of BDSM accoutrements in it. And it's a shame that's kind of the one a lot of people think about when they think of BDSM. And obviously it's not BDSM, that's a non-consensual scene. That's not what BDSM is. But it was a very influential scene because it was such a good movie. So I think we might have a way to go before BDSM is represented exactly as I would like to see it in mainstream film. But I do think we're getting there. And for all the criticisms of the 50 Shades of Grey books and movies, I do think that it did change things in mainstream film because it did show a kinky couple doing kinky things, and it was presented as romance rather than, a crime. And that feels like, okay, well, that's better than it was being represented, 20 or 30 years ago.
Ariel, that was such an interesting conversation. Thank you so much. Really enjoyed chatting to you.
Thank you for having me. I really enjoyed it. Thank you.